Jacob Ramsey is in Newcastle for his medical and could be signed by the weekend. There's also an update on Yoane Wissa's situation with Brentford finally finding a replacement, and we'll answer your questions as we look ahead to the Premier League season. It's the final episode of the week of NUFC Transfer Daily. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much to everybody who's continued to support me this summer and ahead of the new season. Please do hit the subscribe button and the like button. Lots of big plans to come. Today we're going to be talking about Jacob Ramsey, Yoane Wissa, of course Alexander Isak, and I'll answer your questions ahead of the new season. Just want to apologise if the video's slightly late. I did sit and watch Eddie Howe's press conference this morning just to avoid being pod bombed basically, and nothing's really changed on the Isak situation. Lots of talk of giving him the choice and olive branches in terms of you're the one who can make the decision. Liverpool can make a decision to bid. Nothing really different that we didn't already know really, and I've written a piece on this basically outlining this exact scenario on Forbes. Alexander Isak may have to come back into the fold because Liverpool don't look like they're going to bid the right money, and Newcastle don't have a replacement as well. That's the other factor. So the fact that Eddie Howe said this, and I think if you read his interview in the Times as well, suggests that he's trying his best to keep the Isak situation alive in terms of him coming back, but he is being very, very matter of fact in the position of not having him available, not focusing too much on him and trying to move past him in the meantime. So we'll see how it all plays out, but nothing really fresh on the Isak situation yet. And I've written a piece on Forbes which is down in the description for you to read. Yeah, the other big thing obviously is Jacob Ramsey is through the door. Basically, he arrived in Newcastle for his medical yesterday. Second signing of the week, and I was on True Faith's Prem Patter podcast yesterday looking at the general picture of the Premier League and talked about basically how my opinion went from a general, when we were discussing the Premier League as a preview of the whole season on Monday, being quite pessimistic because of the transfer situation. Malik Chow and Jacob Ramsey come in, and there's progress on Yoane Wissa, which we'll talk about in a minute. And suddenly there's a little bit more positivity. I've been a little bit more positive on the videos in the last couple of days as well. I think that the depth added this summer has been really important because of what happened 2 years ago in the Champions League when the squad was decimated, and the difference between the first 11 and the bench has been quite stark since the takeover. This summer will hopefully ease that a little bit. As I went through yesterday with my starting 11, I think only Anthony Elanga comes into the team immediately for the Villa game and probably Liverpool and Leeds as well. But Ramsey will be through the door, and he does give a lot of versatility. I think Keith Downey sort of said on his video the other day that in the meantime, while Isak is out of the picture, he can play on the left as an option alongside Harvey Barnes while Anthony Gordon's playing down the middle. And then obviously he can be an option on the left-hand side of the midfield to replace Joe Linton. And we went through his stats from a couple of years ago yesterday. The style of play that he brings is very similar to Joe Willock in that sense, a little bit better I think. But sort of the thought that I had was, a couple of years ago when they signed Sandro Tonali to almost complement Bruno Guimaraes and double up on his skill set. Very similar type of player, obviously slightly different profile in what their strengths are, but very similar type of player in terms of someone who can dominate the ball, dominate the game, and dictate the play, but also get forward in a more progressive, advanced role as well. And I think it's very similar with Jacob Ramsey in the sense that he brings the energy, he brings the ability to break the lines, he brings the intensity that Joe Willock does. And Willock, when he's at his best, is a crucial member of the team for Eddie Howe. The way he represents what Eddie Howe wants on the pitch in terms of the transition and the breaking of the lines. If you can double up on that and have two midfielders who can do that, that's really ideal. So Newcastle will hopefully look even more like an Eddie Howe team in a positive sense with Jacob Ramsey in the team. Let me know what you think. Yeah, quick update before we get into the questions on Yoane Wissa. Dango Ouattara, the fee has been agreed between Brentford and Bournemouth, and they are insisting that is a Brian Mbeumo replacement, but we'll see if that hopefully progresses the Yoane Wissa situation, whether he will be allowed to join Newcastle next week. It's very much like the Alexander Isak situation with Liverpool. Newcastle haven't matched Brentford's valuation, but you would get the sense that wouldn't be so much of an issue if Brentford had a replacement in. Similarly to Isak, if Newcastle had signed Sesko, I don't think they'd be holding out for 150 million. So what happens here is going to be really interesting. We'll probably have more of an answer over the next week. I know there was supposed to be progress this week, but that hasn't happened because there's a bit of a logjam. There's a bit of a house chain, as I sort of mentioned on a video the other day. So yeah, a big positive move, hopefully in the swing for Yoane Wissa to join Newcastle. And if you add that to Ramsey and Malik Chow, that's a really good couple of weeks that's transformed the summer, transformed the squad's strength. If you can then keep Alexander Isak, then it does look like a positive summer and you can get going again. Again, let me know if you agree with that. We'll just get into your questions to preview the season before we wrap up. And there was a couple on X and on Blue Sky about Will Asula. Alex asked, what's the role for Will Asula this season? A la Lewis Hall last season before his injury? If not, that's an issue for me, as it's £15 million wasted that could have been spent or saved elsewhere. And Pablo Blanco put on Blue Sky, with all the noise around Isak, one that has been forgotten is Asula. He hasn't had a great pre-season and hasn't looked bad either. What do we think his role is in the coming months? And I think, Alex is really right here. There's a big moment for Will Asula. It doesn't feel like he's going to have Lewis Hall moment, but I think that's a very, it's an easy and obvious comparison to make because they have been treated very similarly in the interim of their arrivals. Very few games and not really thrown in by Eddie Howe. But Lewis Hall was extremely highly rated at Chelsea. He played 12-15 games for them at left back. He played at St James's Park a couple of seasons ago, made his debut quite ironically, and was predicted to be an England international within a few years, as he probably would have been last season more often if he hadn't got injured. Will Asula is a lot more raw than that. He's had one senior season in the Premier League before at Sheffield United, scored no goals in that time in 23 or 24 games, has good raw attributes, but just doesn't look of the standard yet that's required, and that's been magnified a little bit more than it, in quite an unfair way, I think, on Will Asula because of the Isak situation, because Newcastle need a really, really elite striker now. The idea that Will Asula comes into the picture has been changed beyond just being a bit part player. I think he's got a role to play with more games this year, coming off the bench a bit more, as a third choice striker behind Wissa and hopefully Isak, but somebody else if that happens. And I think he will develop a little bit further. I think his development will. I don't think he's ever going to be Newcastle's number 9 and main striker at the level that they're going for. But I think he definitely can have more of an impact this season. There were bright sparks towards the end. Obviously, he played really well in the Cup against Birmingham. He then came on and scored against Ipswich. He's not had a great pre-season, and I don't think he's in line to start against Villa on Saturday. But I would imagine he's going to get some more game time. It'll be a progression on where he was last season. It'll just be the same role, third choice striker, but maybe coming on for more 15-20 minute cameos than he did last year, when actually even really in the Premier League he only started to get those towards the end of the season. So I still think he's got a future at Newcastle, but I don't imagine that he's going to be in a position to contribute on the level that maybe people hope he can. The next question is from Geordie Mike on X, who said, we thought last summer was bad, but this is worse. Is the club finally going to act to making sure it never happens again? See, I disagree in a sense because of what's happened, but I do understand the spirit of the question, because if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I'd have said it was worse because of all the Isak talk, because of the lack of transfers that had happened and the number of rejections and all those sorts of things. That's absolutely fair. The last couple of weeks have sort of eased that for the reasons I've explained in the last couple of days. But it does come down to the fact that there's no sporting director, there's no structure above Eddie Howe. And Eddie Howe speaking today about his press conference was asked about negotiations and deals, and he says he wants to be involved with the idea of the player and knowing who the player is and what they're going to bring, but he doesn't want to be really negotiating. I think that's where there's been a lot of clouds this summer, and really, I mean, this wouldn't have happened if there was a sporting director in place and a CEO. That's on the club. Like, I know that Paul Mitchell leaving didn't help, but why hasn't there been an appointment at CEO level over the last 11 months? And how did it get to this stage where Paul Mitchell was so intrinsically linked to Darren Eales as well, as it appears? It's just felt quite wrong and amateurish over the last year, and for this to really feel like it's going to change, there needs to be a long-term sporting director and a long-term CEO in place with different ideas. And I think that they are imminent appointments by the sounds of it, Ross Wilson and David Hopkinson in those two positions. And hopefully this sort of feeling of negativity and sort of borderline crisis will not happen again beyond this summer. Next up, we've got Liam, who says, what do you think Howe's standard team and formation is going to be when the season really gets going? So I think that the standard formation will be 4-3-3. I think he loves it. I think there'll be more fluidity maybe than with Jacob Ramsey coming in. There's an opportunity to play 4-2-3-1 and have a number 10, somebody who can get on the ball a little bit more and make things happen a little bit more in that sense. I think that's an exciting thing. But 4-3-3 will be the formation. If Isak stays, eventually he'll be up front. I don't buy all this thing of him not playing. And also I think Newcastle will have certain standards, and then he'll have certain standards that he has to meet to come back in. But I think once it gets to September after the international break, I'm thinking after the Wolves game when everything's really settled down, because that's when the transfer window's shut. Then there's the international break. Once the Wolves game comes around, we'll have more of an idea. I think progressively Malik Chow and Aaron Ramsdale will be in the team by the end of the season, but it'll be 4-3-3 with Elanga on the right as well as the main 11, but we'll see more of a squad game. And that's why I think, as I say, Newcastle have done what they've done, raising the floor of the squad rather than the ceiling, because the difference between the first 11 and the bench needs to be stronger. So we'll see more players involved and playing 30, 40, 50 games this season than maybe last year. But I think tactically from the start, I don't think we'll be too surprised by what we see from Eddie Howe's team. Mike Potts says, how do you think Ramsey will be used this season? So yeah, I think, as I said, he will be used as an option on the left of the three, because Joe Linton does miss quite a few games and isn't suited to certain games in ways that I explained, because he's not very strong in possession. We've seen previously that Jacob Ramsey certainly is that. I think he'll get lots of games on the left. But the interesting thing I think will happen is that he'll allow Newcastle to maybe change formation and use a number 10 in a 4-2-3-1. That was a big thing that I noticed last season when you're looking to break teams down in home games, that they struggled to do that. So that's the role that I think Jacob Ramsey could really shine in. But yeah, those three positions, I'm sure he'll get plenty of games. So although on a 1-11 he may not feature in the team, I think he will get as many games as if he would, if that makes sense. James has asked, for all the fans and pundits who are confident that Isak stays, are we overlooking how many points that and he might cost us in the meantime? That's a fair point. I think Newcastle would have a much better chance of winning the game against Aston Villa if Alexander Isak was up front. That's an obvious thing to say. The Liverpool game is really ill-timed in the sense of this whole thing for both teams. I think if Liverpool weren't playing Newcastle next weekend, then the Isak situation would be a lot smoother, because Newcastle don't want to sell him before then, if they have to sell him at all. Liverpool know that it's going to be difficult to integrate him then. A similar sort of thing to the Ramsey situation, although it's not quite the same. But even if Isak's here, he's definitely not going to play in that game, and then Leeds as well just before the window shuts. I think they're three difficult games for three different reasons, and not having Isak really weakens Newcastle. So it's a very, very fair point. I think something that Newcastle have got to deal with. There's no real way around it. If they can get Yoane Wissa in, hopefully by Liverpool and Leeds, maybe it'll be slightly different. But even he's having the same issue as Isak. He's not been training with Brentford. He's not really fit enough and match fit, ready to go and hit the ground running. So it's just, this is something that is a tale as old as time, really, in transfer windows when these things happen. It's a lot of politics, and the result of that is, not having to play them or not having players fully fit. And yeah, as I said, my focus is really the Wolves game for the world where Isak reintegrates. That's when I'm focusing, and it's kind of a case of getting to that situation with as many points as possible with three very, very difficult games. It's a very fair question from James, absolutely. And Juan has asked, how bad could it be, or how good could it get? How bad could it be? I think, it depends on the Isak situation. The whole thing, really, for me, if Newcastle sell Isak, God forbid, without a replacement, I think Newcastle are asking for trouble. I think if they sell him anyway, in my opinion, they're really asking for trouble. If they can reintegrate him, then it'll be a great season. If there's some middle ground where he stays but doesn't reintegrate properly or something, that's also a bit of a difficulty. But this is going to be a really tough season. I don't think you can look at last season and think that the same thing can happen, because they were 12th in December and went on a really good run, got themselves into a great position by the time they played the cup final and then finished the job. I don't think that sort of run can happen because the top four is stronger. Manchester United are going to be not sort of in the bottom half. They're going to be in and around that, I think, as well. Spurs too, I would imagine, and Villa. And then you look at Everton coming in as well, and then you're not even talking about Brighton and Bournemouth as well, who are really exciting projects too. So the competition for those sorts of for those European spots is going to be really difficult. Newcastle need to be very, very much on it. They've got a good enough squad. They've got an exciting enough team, and Eddie Howe is a man who I've said before is the most important figure at Newcastle. With him there, they can achieve anything. For me, it really rests on Isak. If he's here and he reintegrates and he scores 25 goals next season, absolutely Newcastle United will be fine and they'll get back into Europe. That's my honest opinion. And Paul says, if Isak stays past the window, would we be looking to sell him in January? Obviously, that's a much more difficult window. I think ideally, if Isak stays, hopefully the idea will be that there's some sort of gentleman's agreement or release clause or thing to say that he stays until the summer, because for that reason that Paul's just outlined, it's a difficult window to do business in, and also there's not many options to sign. That's part of the issue. If you're looking to buy Samu from Porto in January, it's not going to be any easier. It's definitely not going to be easier to buy Strand Larsen from Wolves or Mateta from Palace, whose prices are already going to be really high. So I think the idea, if he stays, from a Newcastle perspective, certainly, and hopefully you can get this into Isak's head as well, that if he stays for the season. We'll see what happens. I think it'll be an easy departure next summer because I think it's obvious that he's going to do that. So my thought process is that the starting point will be that he stays to the summer, and hopefully Newcastle are in a position where he wants to stay till the summer because there's plenty to finish and achieve in the second half of next season. But that's all hypotheticals at the moment. He has to stay beyond the next 3 weeks, so it's really difficult to answer that question definitively. I don't think Newcastle will be looking to sell him in January, but whether he's looking to move in January is a different question. Whether Liverpool are more able to engage on a certain price at that point. I think most clubs, though, would prefer to do these deals in the summer. Thanks so much for joining me on today's video. Like, share and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow to react immediately after the Aston Villa game. I'm not going to be at Villa Park, even though I hoped I would be. I am hoping to be, if I can get in the press box, because it's going to be absolutely filled at Liverpool a week on Monday. I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.